Following up our last song with another heater from Run the Jewels, with production by Queens of the Stone Age frontman Josh Homme, as well as vocals from Mavis Staples, who was featured on our first song. It relies on heavy Christian imagery to both vilify today's systems and empower listeners to reach within for the hope and power to bring about real change. With it, I wanted to talk briefly about duopolies, specifically the one in our political system. A duopoly is the same thing as a monopoly, where two firms, instead of one, have the dominant control over the market. Some common duopolies that come to mind: Coke and Pepsi, Marvel and DC Comics, Intel and AMD. Chances are you've heard of all these, but you might not have noticed perhaps the biggest duopoly of all, the Democratic and Republican parties. America has a long history of political parties with familiar and unfamiliar names like the Green Party, the Whigs and the Tories, the Federalists, and on and on. I guess it's not immediately apparent as to why there is an issue with the vast majority of our politicians having to fall into these two categories in order to even participate, until you dig deeper and realize that despite all of the vilification each party does to each other, especially during the election season, there's actually very little difference in the actual policies that they pass. The most significant difference between the two parties is the lip service they pay to their constituents. To clarify, the differences in ideology between the left and the right, the liberals and the conservatives, the socialists and the fascists are big, no doubt. The thing is, these differences aren't really present in our representative parties. Observing the track record of both parties, you'll find that both have fielded presidents and congressmen who have approved vast military spending, support increased police budgets, are willing to destabilize other nations for our benefit, are unwilling to implement the drastic policy needed to combat climate change, and most importantly, both parties rely so heavily on the monetary contributions from big business. By big business, I'm referring to fossil fuel companies like Exxon, pharmaceutical companies like Merck, and defense contractors like Lockheed Martin. These companies are the greatest drivers behind many of the world's greatest issues, like global warming, the opioid epidemic, and constant war. Going back to the concept of a duopoly, I'd encourage you to view our political system as any other competitive industry, where two firms, the Democrats and the Republicans, have not only stifled any competition, but are currently owned not by the American voters they claim to represent, but by these mega corporations that can afford to literally pay their way to favorable policies. When you ask the American people, the majority from both sides show support for policies like tougher restrictions on pollution and stricter rules regarding big money in politics. These policies won't see the light of day because the two parties are both enslaved to the billions of dollars the big companies pump in every year to buy their loyalty and to turn a blind eye to the millions of peoples marching in the streets to call for climate reform, to the innocent lives that are regularly killed in the Middle East by American weapons sold to foreign governments, and to the suffering of regular American people who just can't afford their medical bills or medications. I think out of all the topics I brought up, this one feels the most pessimistic, unhelpful, pouting Kirby I'm baby meme out of all of them. On one hand, I want to blame the system for making me feel so powerless, and on the other, I want to fight that feeling and still encourage you all to vote this November. Because even though this year offers two of the least appealing candidates in a long time, and don't think I'm forgetting 2016 when I say that, but even though Biden doesn't get me super jazzed, I know the most unhelpful thing we can do is nothing at all. Thanks for listening. I will wrap it up after this next song.